Does this sound familiar? Clients let you know they're on holiday next week, or they cancel their appointment just hours before your 48-hour cancellation charge. You're left feeling out of pocket and decide to take on more clients and work more hours to make ends meet. But that just exhausts you. How can you build a sustainable private practice when client attendance varies so much? Welcome to the Good Enough Counsellors podcast. I'm Josephine Hughes, and today we're going to discuss something that comes up virtually every week in counselling Facebook groups. What can you do about client attendance, or the lack of it, and the impact this has on your income? Usually the question is framed in terms of cancellation policy. How can I ensure that clients pay? But actually, I saw a question recently that really got me thinking about what the heart of the problem is here. And the person asked in a counselling Facebook group, what do you do about your cancellation policies? Would you charge a week in advance? Because I have clients that say at the end of the session, I'm not going to be able to come in next week. And that's a space that I'm not going to be able to fill because it's their normal space. So the questioner wanted to know if it would be acceptable to actually charge a client that far in advance for cancellation. Now, the beauty of private practice is you are able to set your own policies and you can think through how you would like to run your private practice. You can make the choices that work for you. But I think when we do consider our policies, it's not just about what we need in our business, but it's also about what our clients need in terms of putting the client first and looking after them. I actually think we need to approach fee setting with a business mindset because that will help you to sustain your practice. And it's actually the more ethical approach because I think what we can be in danger of doing is putting our business needs onto our clients. And I believe that isn't an ethical approach. Bear with me, I'll explain this a little bit more. I think it's really important to think about fees in terms of how they can sustain us, because when we set our fees at a rate that sustains us, that actually means we're responsible for looking after ourselves and we're not making our clients responsible for that process. We're less likely to pressurise clients when we have fees that actually sustain our private practice. And this is what I'm going to spend a little bit of time untangling and explaining in this podcast. So I wonder what your response is to that question. Is it okay to charge my clients a week in advance so that if they decide they're not coming in next week, I still get paid? I've seen different approaches, and I think sometimes it can be part of a particular modality to include those charges. Certainly I've seen policies from psychodynamic practitioners where the client has to pay every week unless the therapist is on holiday. So that's one particular approach from a particular modality where the contract is very boundaried. I wonder how that sits with you, whatever your modality is. Would that be something that you'd like to contract with your clients? I think many of us acknowledge that clients will be missing sessions for various reasons, such as holidays, and the majority of us don't tend to charge when we're given advance notice of that. We tend to absorb it. What are the other options? Here's a thought from outside the box. As counsellors, we often connect our fees to an hourly rate, but the coaching world actually divorces itself from the hourly rate and offers instead a package. And you could perhaps offer a package of psychological support over a certain period of time. And this then wouldn't connect you to the number of hours. You could say that it's for a certain amount of time, for example, 3 months, and that a 3-month package costs X. You could say that it would include, instead of 12 weeks support, you could say it includes 10 sessions. that allows you an extra 2 sessions where the client can't attend, but it might also introduce the thought that the client could contact you between sessions for extra psychological support. They might say, for example, if they're on holiday, well, can I email you that week I'm on holiday? So it's something thinking outside the box. I'm just putting it out there because it's a different way of working and it's one that we don't necessarily consider. But again, there's ethical considerations that we do need to include when we're considering something like that. But it's another way of working. But I think the interesting thing about it is the allowance for the cancellations. Now, I was talking to a member of Therapy Growth Group yesterday about her fee setting. And something she's been doing since I suggested it to her is she's actually been keeping a weekly record of all her figures. So she was able to tell me straight away that her cancellations average out at 10% each week. That's a really useful figure to be able to work with. And I wonder if you know that. I wonder if you could go back over your diary and work it out. What is your cancellation rate? I think what we tend to do, and this is part of the problem of what we're doing, is we tend to work out our fees if we actually put any thought into them apart from just looking at what everybody else is charging and putting a pin in a figure and just picking it out of the blue. If we do tend to think about our fees and what we're going to charge, we often make the mistake of assuming that we'll have 100% attendance rate. So for example, you might charge £60 per session. You want to have 15 clients a week, and that works out at £3,600 per month. And you base your figures on a full practice of 15 clients a week. But of course, we know that those 15 clients are going to be going on holiday, cancelling outside our cancellation charge window, that to a certain extent there's going to be a perhaps 10% cancellation rate. So rather than making 3,600, you're going to be making 3,240 if you get a 10% cancellation rate where it's not paid for. And we don't tend to build that into our fee setting. Let's just step back a moment to that little side comment I make, because I think a lot of people don't know how to set their fees. And what they tend to do is they have a look at what everyone else is charging. And depending on how much experience you've got, is you think, well, I'm just starting out. So there's people there who've been working for longer than me and they're charging, say, £50. So I can't charge as much as that because I'm not as experienced as them. So I'll charge 40. And that is not taking into account how many hours you're going to work, how much time you've got, what your different costs are. You're just basing it on what everybody else is charging. I think you should put your charges up each year, at least, to keep up with inflation, if nothing else. But also, to add on extra if you've got extra experiences. No, I haven't got a problem with that at all. But what I have got a problem with is the assumption that then people would look at someone who's been in practice for a while, who's maybe a supervisor, who's maybe been working in private practice for 10 years, looks at their figure and thinks, I can't charge as much as that. Because effectively what you're doing there is you're basing your figures on someone else's money blocks. Many of us have money blocks. We don't think about our figures. We're perhaps in different circumstances. For example, you could have someone who's not really doing it because they're making a full-time income from it. They're just doing it as an add-on where perhaps it isn't as important to them to be charging a market rate. And you could compare yourself to them and think that you can't charge as much as them. And historically, this is the way it's been for a lot of counsellors. They haven't charged the market rate. And if you're a counsellor who is working full-time, you've just graduated, this is going to be your full-time income, why should you be held back by someone's historic rate? And so I think the notion of basing your fee on your rate of experience compared to what you perceive everyone else's experience to be is actually not very helpful. I think you have to approach it with a much more business-like sense. And I'm going to give another example of a question that came up in one of my Facebook groups recently. And this was someone saying, I can't afford to pay my room rental, so I'm going to have to go online. will I be able to make a successful private practice if I'm just working online? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, yes, you can have a successful online private practice, but there's an assumption underlying that statement: I can't afford my room rental. And that assumption is I cannot afford to charge my clients more. Quite simply, business is all about bringing in enough money to make a profit and pay your costs. So you have a certain amount of costs. You're going to have costs for supervision. You're going to have costs for your room rental. You're going to have costs for your insurance, your professional membership body. These are all costs. Your CPD is another example. Your Information Commissioner's Office fee that comes up every year. You have some fixed costs. And you also have maybe costs that things you would love to afford, like an expensive CPD, for example. Now, these are your costs. You need to have enough money coming in to cover those costs, but also you're not doing this for free. You need to include profit so that you can take an income from your profit. And can I just say, you need to make enough profit so that the months that you're busier, you can afford to put money aside to cover the months when you're quieter, because we do work in a business that tends to be seasonal. So I'm recording this just before Christmas. Some people are really busy because they've got clients who are desperate to see them before they go home for the Christmas holidays, and others are quieter because their clients are maybe at work, busier, doing parties. I don't know. It's just some people are busy, some people aren't. But the fact is that we all have seasonal quiet times, and we need to earn enough to cover those seasonal quiet times. So when you're setting your fees, you need to allow a buffer so that you can put money aside. So in the quieter months or those weeks where everybody's got flu, you're covered. You've still got some money that you can use to pay your bills. And historically, I've got a real bee in my bonnet about this, as you can hear. Historically, we just haven't approached our fee setting from a business mindset. We just put a pin in a figure and pluck it out of thin air, and we think that's what we should charge. Now, I do have a fee calculator available on my website. It's very simple, because if you make it too complicated, it gets overwhelming. But go on there and work out your fees. I'll pop the link into the show notes. You need to allow for your holidays. You need to allow for your sickness. You need to allow for the fact that 10 to 20% of your clients will not be turning up each week. It's thinking about, am I making enough money to be able to pay myself? When you've got your fees set at a reasonable level, that means that you have that buffer for the slow months, that means you have that buffer for the cancellations and the no-shows. That means that you can relax into your practice knowing that you are looked after. And the reason why I think this is ethical is it means that we don't put undue pressure on our clients to attend. Personally, for me, I think it's unreasonable to charge a cancellation policy a week in advance. I wouldn't do it. That is where I'm coming from. Your ethics might be different to mine. We all have to work on our own ethics and how we understand it. But for me, I wouldn't want to put that pressure on my clients. I want to be able to absorb that cost of them saying, I'm not going to be here next week. I want to be able to say, okay, let's book you in the week after or whenever you're back from holiday, and for there to be no drama about it. A coach of mine came out with this phrase, and I often quote it: it's maths or drama. Where do you want to be with your clients? Will you put the work in on the maths? Let's face it, maths is horrible. I don't like it anyway, and I'd much rather prefer to be seeing clients than working out my fees. But actually, maths is just maths. It's just working it out, sitting down, looking through it, doing a few calculations. And as I say, you can use my fee calculator to help you if you're not a mathematician. My husband is, and he set up the fee calculator just for us counsellors who don't like maths. But yeah, you can do the maths, or you can get involved in the drama. You can get into the drama of worrying each week, will I have enough money this week? You can get into the drama of trying to persuade your clients that they shouldn't finish, or that they should pay you. You can get into the drama of trying to think about, do I need to extend my cancellation policy? If you've got enough money coming in, you're looking after yourself and you can set your boundaries accordingly, it stops you being in a drama triangle. So fee setting, although it's something that we don't like to talk about, it is really important to both our self-care and the care of our clients. We really don't talk about it enough, and that's why I've got a bit of a bee in my bonnet about it. Now, I know that we can get incredibly uncomfortable talking about fees, and the next part of what I'm going to say is actually addressing that discomfort. And believe me, this is not something that I'm talking about from an academic viewpoint. I have been there. When I first started in private practice, I did just that. I looked around, I saw what everyone else was charging, and I tried to work it out, and I thought, well, I think I'm worth more than £35, which was the sort of lower end of what people were charging at that point. I'm going to charge 40. So I bravely put 40 into my counselling directory entry, and then I didn't get any inquiries for a few weeks, and I looked around and I thought, well, there's so many people charging 35, there's so many people who are charging 40, I think I'll go down to 35. And yeah, I did get clients at 35. But what happened is that I actually, in order to make ends meet, and because I found it difficult to say no, I actually found that I was seeing more and more clients, and I ended up getting a little bit burned out. And what happened eventually is I did put my fees up. And wow, what a difference that made. I couldn't believe it, because I actually had a lot more space in my diary, but I was earning the same amount of money as before. And honestly, I really think that made such a difference to me. It meant that I could enjoy my work. It meant I had space. And I think it made a difference to the clients, because I had time to reflect. I had time to think. I would turn up for their sessions refreshed and ready to spend time with them. It wasn't like, oh, another client. It was a joy. And I think this is what fee setting, the math side of it, rather than the drama, actually gives us. It helps us to look after ourselves, and it helps us to look after our clients. And that's why it's so important. So why did I worry about it? Why did I find it so very difficult to put up my fees? I know this is an uncomfortable subject for many of us, and let's just unravel that a little bit. First off, I think there is that whole thing about being in a helping profession, and also for many of us who are women, we get a message that we aren't worth as much, and that helping professions, because they're dominated by women, that they historically haven't been valued as much. And I think that's just part of what we learn, that what we're doing isn't as valuable as other professions. And I think that might even be something that pervades throughout society. And it's difficult to think, I'm worth more than this. I think another aspect of this is that money can be a bit of a dirty word in the helping professions. And I'm sure you're aware that many people who are brave enough to maybe do an advert on Facebook about their private practice can get replies saying, oh, you're making money out of other people's misery. And that upsets us. We find that hard to be accused of exploiting people's pain. And that's the way it's often framed, isn't it? You're exploiting people for your own ends. What I think is important to say at this point is someone who thinks that is never going to be a private practice client of yours. And I think it's really important that we recognise that some people just have an axe to grind, and that they can grind the axe when they see your Facebook advert. But let's just reframe it. You're gifted. You're trained. Why shouldn't you be paid for doing something that helps people, that makes a huge difference, to them, to their friends, their family, their work colleagues, that makes a huge difference to society. We know that therapy changes lives. It helps people be more fully themselves. And you're gifted in offering therapy. If you weren't paid for offering therapy, how would it be for you? You'd have to work elsewhere to be able to earn your income. You'd be fitting in your practice around all your other commitments. You'd have to take a pay cut elsewhere perhaps to be able to fit it in. What good does that do you? And why should you expect to suffer as a result of the work that you're doing? So you're not exploiting people's pain. You're actually getting paid for releasing them into a new way of being that benefits all of us. What a fantastic gift. We don't expect doctors to work for free. We don't expect teachers to work for free. We don't expect nurses to work for free. So why are counsellors expected to work for free? Let's knock that one on the head and move on. There's several different money stories that we can have going on in our heads. And one of them is related to our own backgrounds. And often, if we've come from a background where perhaps we haven't had a lot of money in our background, it's difficult for us to imagine a situation where people can easily afford therapy. And if we're in a situation where, quite frankly, affording therapy is a bit of a challenge, it's difficult for us to imagine that other people might be able to afford therapy and it not be a challenge. But I used to feel guilty about the fact that I come from quite a wealthy background. I have a childhood where material things were mainly catered for. And sometimes when I've worked with therapists who haven't had that sort of background, I felt a bit shy about admitting that. But what I've realised is actually it's a bit of a gift, because I do know that there are people out there who can afford to pay for therapy, where it can get absorbed into their household expenses, and it's just another expense that they can cover. And I think often if you haven't got that sort of background, you can actually think to yourself, well, I can't afford to charge this much because people won't be able to pay for it. It's thinking instead, I may not be able to afford this, but there are people out there who can afford it. So I just want you to think about that one a little bit, and maybe you might even like to go away and journal on that. You know, how much has my past experience of finances and household income impacted my thinking around fees? Another aspect that I've touched on is the thought of I can't charge more than other people. And this particularly comes up, as I say, with this notion of expertise. I can't charge more than my supervisor. But why should you be held back by other people's money blocks? That's the drama. The maths is that you go away and you work out actually how much you need to charge in order to cover your costs, to give you an income and to give you that buffer. A money block that I had to get over when I first started in private practice was the thought that I don't have to be affordable for everybody. And I think this is another money block that many of us have. We think if people tell us they can't afford to pay, that means we're charging too much. And what really helped me with this was talking to my brother-in-law, who's a very senior businessman who was initially trained in marketing. And he told me that if you're not turning away about 20% of clients on the basis of affordability, you're probably not charging enough. So his expectation was that about 20% of clients should be saying, I'm sorry, I can't afford that. Now for us, that probably feels like, oh, I can't afford to turn away 20% of my clients. I won't have enough clients. And that leads you onto a whole other money block. And the money block is that there aren't enough clients who can afford me. And you think, I've got to take on everyone. and you bend over backwards and do all sorts of acrobatics trying to fit in people who can't really afford you. For example, you might offer concessionary rates, or you might offer free sessions. It's up to you whether or not you do that. But again, what I would suggest is that you need to bring in the maths, and you need to think to yourself, okay, if I'm doing a certain number of free spaces, how does that impact my other work? I made the decision a while back that my private practice is actually a business, and that if I earn enough in my business, I can then make charitable donations. And actually, that was going to be my voluntary contribution to society, that I wasn't going to use my counselling work as my contribution in terms of how I'm going to volunteer. That was my choice. Other people choose differently. It's obviously your choice. But what I would say is it's really important to factor in that price and how you're going to absorb the cost of seeing people for free or for reduced price within your overall income. Because with my business hat on, again, I think it does come back to the maths or drama. We therapists are really sensitive to people's needs, and I think we find it really hard to see other people suffer. And we're very aware of the mental health crisis that is happening in this country, for example, amongst young people. We're very aware that people perhaps are making decisions that harm them, that harm the people they love, that ultimately harm society, and that therapy would make a real difference. And sometimes what we do is we take on that responsibility for them to be helped into our private practice. And I think sometimes, unless we're very careful about it, this can be problematic to us. The fact is we aren't responsible for other people's mental health problems. We aren't responsible for the lack of provision of mental health care. We don't necessarily have to try and resolve this by seeing people who need help. Just think outside the box. If you had time, you could do other things, such as campaigning, or, like me, doing a podcast to reach out to parents of transgender adults. There's lots of other ways that you can make a contribution to society that doesn't have to be at the cost of your business, your private practice, and your own mental well-being. But let's move on to what I think is actually a real fundamental difficulty that we have with either raising our fees or setting our fees at a higher rate than perhaps people around us. And that's the thought that if I charge more, I won't be able to get enough clients. Let me just say in passing that if you are charging more, you can see fewer clients. Fewer clients who pay more give you more time and space, and they also enable you to be able to afford to do things like your CPD, for example. I worked with someone a few years ago now who was completely rushed off her feet with clients. She wanted to be able to do her CPD, but she was working so hard. And what we did is we gradually introduced higher fees into her practice, with the result that she got her life back. She charged more because she was quite specialist. She saw fewer clients, but she was able to do the CPD that really helped those particular clients. And for her, it was just a win-win situation. She was able to have a sustainable practice. She had fewer clients, they paid more, but she was able to do the work to support them in between. She's still working, she's still charging higher fees, but she's made that practice long-term sustainable to her. It's a really brave step to take, isn't it? To know that you'll be able to still attract clients, even if you put your prices up. And I think fundamentally it's a question of confidence. Am I good enough to be able to market myself and attract clients who will pay me more? But if you think about it, if you are charging more, you don't need to work so hard at your marketing. You'll have more time to work at your marketing because you're not seeing loads of clients every week, but you don't need to attract as many either. So it can be a win-win situation, but we don't tend to think of it like that. What I'd like to ask you to consider, is this what's making you stuck? Is it because you don't have the confidence and the self-belief to know that if you put your prices up, you'll still be able to attract clients? This is something that I help people with in my coaching work. So I have a membership group called Therapy Growth Group where we do spend time working out how we can make this happen. The lady who I mentioned earlier, who has a 10% cancellation rate, is also seeing 30 clients a week. Since she came on my Make Your Profile Work program in the summer, she's changed her marketing and that's been the result. And in fact, this all came up because we're recognising she's attracting too many clients. And one of the ways that you can control the flow of clients is to put your prices up. But she's an example of someone for whom my Make Your Profile Work training has really helped. And the reason it can help people is that it helps you to know who it is that you're trying to reach out to. And I have a structured program to help you know how to communicate with the people that you work really well with, how to talk to them so that they get booked in with you, how to talk to them so they don't send out all these speculative inquiries to loads of counsellors, but actually get in touch with you because they want to work with just you. And that's the position you want to be in, because when people just want to work with you, then they're usually prepared to pay a little bit extra in order to do so. So that's something that I can support you with in Therapy Growth Group. And I've got my next Make Your Profile Work training coming up in February. So if you're interested in joining with that, please do click on the links that I'll put in the show notes to tell you a little bit more about it. So as we reach the end of the episode, let's have a little recap. We've talked about how setting our fees can be about maths or drama. It's really helpful when you're thinking about your fees to not just pick a figure out of thin air or out of what everyone else is charging in your area, but to sit down and think about your costs. How much do you anticipate spending per client? How much does it cost for you in terms of your supervision fees, your room costs, your insurance, your CPD, all the things that you have to spend money on in order to make your business work? Those are your costs. And on top of that, you need to allow a profit. And within your profit margins, you need to allow for people to cancel for holidays, both your holidays and their holidays, and your sickness and their sickness, and to allow for those seasonal fluctuations that can happen in our practice, so that each month you know that you've got that buffer so you can cover your costs and your bills and have some money even if you haven't got a lot of clients coming in, and allowing for your better months to fund your slower months. This is the maths. It doesn't have to be drama. But the drama comes in when we haven't set our fees at a rate that sustains us. And that means that we may well be more tempted to pressurise our clients with things like long cancellation policies, or trying to persuade them to stay for an extra session, or getting a bit resentful if they do cancel. The drama also comes in when we're not prepared to acknowledge that we have money blocks. And those money blocks can be things like the guilt around taking responsibility for society's ills and thinking that we should be providing free therapy services. There's the drama of thinking that if we can't afford it, that means that our clients won't be able to afford it. There's the whole drama of thinking that we know what other people's money situation is. There's thinking that if people say they can't afford me, that means I'm charging too much. And there's that thought of, I've got to take on all the clients that come to me and I've got to accommodate them, even if they can't afford me. But I think what's really important to consider is how can I build a practice that is sustainable, where I'm able to relax into seeing my clients, where I've got enough space to be able to spend time reflecting on them, where if I need to, I can afford to pay for extra supervision, where I can give myself time to go on that expensive CPD course and know that it's okay if it impacts client sessions that week. It's okay because I can afford not to have a client income that week. I think fee setting is a fundamental building block of our private practices, and unless we're prepared to talk about it more and to consider the math side of fee setting, we do get into a lot of drama. I hope this episode has helped you to think about what might be getting in the way of your fee setting and help you to provide both an ethical and sustainable private practice. There's clients out there who need the service that you're providing, and let's make that service something that you'll be able to go on providing for years to come, however long you want to be in private practice. Thanks for listening. Do come and join my Facebook community, Good Enough Counsellors. And for more information about how I can help you develop your private practice, please visit my website, josephinehughes.com. If you found this episode helpful, I'd love it if you could share it with a fellow therapist or leave a review on your podcast app. And in closing, I'd love to remind you that every single step you make gets you closer to your dream. I really believe you can do it.